Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really intense, highly militant Orthodox Marxist-Leninist text titled The Concrete Task in a Storm-Tossed World. Now, our goal here is purely analytical. We're going to objectively map out the architecture of this worldview, breaking down exactly how they interpret modern geopolitics, economics, and their call for a fiercely militant communist revival. Let's see what's actually driving this perspective.
Here is how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the shifting global balance, then the inevitable imperialist clashes, followed by how they expose false ideologies, the rise of the global proletariat, and finally, the neo-Leninist Science Party.
All right, Section 1, the shifting global balance and uneven economic growth.
The entire foundation of this text rests on one absolutely core premise. The rapid, uneven economic growth of the modern world is actively dismantling the old geopolitical order. History, they argue, is suddenly rushing forward. Just look at these numbers based on Angus Madison's macroeconomic forecasts. Between 2003 and 2030, China's share of world GDP is projected to surge from 14% to nearly 24%, and India's goes from 5.6% to almost 10%. On the flip side, the USA and Western Europe, they're shown in steady decline. The old powers are literally losing their grip.
To put that into perspective, consider this extreme snapshot from 2007. China saw a massive 10% economic growth, while the USA grew by only 1.9%. Now, according to the text, this extreme disparity is the true engine of global instability. This kind of uneven growth means emerging powers are inevitably going to claim their place in the New World Order, and that's going to severely disrupt the established balances that affect all of us. And yet, we often ignore these turbulent realities just out of pure comfort. The author draws directly on Leon Trotsky to make this point, stating, "Our slothful thought insists on not recognizing them until the last minute. Poor thought. It always ends up splattered against the wall of facts." It's a pretty striking way to mock the complacency of anyone who thinks the current global order will just peacefully continue forever.
Which brings us to Section 2, Inevitable Imperialist Clashes and the Prospect of a New Capitalist War. These shifting economic bases we just talked about, they aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They inevitably lead to militarization. To back this up, we're presented with a staggering reality from 2007, $1,200 billion in global military spending. This massive return to Cold War spending levels is framed as absolute proof that a multipolar arms race is already well underway. So while diplomats might be out there talking about peace, the capital is undeniably flowing straight into preparations for war. And this new arms race relies on some incredibly advanced hardware. We're talking about American airborne lasers, Chinese strike-to-kill anti-satellite technology, invisible sung submarines, and even the EU's Galileo satellite system, which has distinct military capabilities. The text argues that all major powers, even the ones loudly claiming to be peaceful, like the European Union, are systematically preparing for an inevitable, violent conflict over resources.
But why does this actually happen? Taking a purely economic, completely non-moralistic view of imperialism, the author draws straight from Lenin. The capitalists divide the world not out of any particular malice, but because the degree of concentration which has been reached forces them to adopt this method in order to obtain profits. In this view, war isn't about evil leaders at all. It's just a structural mathematical certainty of capitalism trying to survive.
Let's move to Section 3, Exposing False Ideologies, or how the masses get tricked. So, if war is just a math problem for the ruling class, how on earth do they get regular people to actually fight it? Well, the answer relies on the classic Marxist concept of false consciousness. Think of it as a view of reality turned upside down, where the ruling class manages to pass off its own peculiar, profit-driven interests as values that are common to everyone. It's basically a machine designed to make the ideas of the ruling class the ruling ideas of society. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the framework takes aim at some very popular modern movements to find this false consciousness. Modern environmentalism, for instance, gets heavily critiqued here. The argument is that yesterday's anti-nuclear protesters ultimately ended up advancing the interest of petroleum multinationals, and today's biofuel advocates are just driving up food prices. In this worldview, trying to respect nature under capitalism is a total delusion that merely masks corporate interests. To them, true environmentalism requires changing the entire mode of production. And other popular social movements? They're dismissed entirely as ideologies of decay. Europeanism is seen as a mask, arming a unified continent for future wars under the guise of a peace project. Individualism is brushed off as just an illusion to keep workers trying to climb a totally broken social ladder. And religion, of course, is classically framed as the opium of the people. It really is a stark reminder of how completely this ideology rejects standard Western values, viewing them simply as tools to pacify the youth and tie the working class to the chariot of imperialism.
Section 4. The Global Proletariat Rising and Massive Resistance. Having outlined the crisis and all these ideological traps, the focus shifts to the counterforce. The argument here is that the very same economic growth creating imperialist rivals is simultaneously forging a highly militant working class. Consider this wild metric. In 2005, there were nearly 1,000 labor disputes per day in China. Millions of people are being thrown into the vortex of class war, and this rapid industrialization is forging a massive new army of proletarian resistance. And it is definitely not just China. We're seeing a newly unified international proletariat forming across completely disparate nations. You've got underpaid construction workers in Dubai, striking Ford employees in St. Petersburg, protesting Nike workers in Vietnam, and massive walkouts at a Renault factory in Romania. The irony here is that globalization has accidentally created a continental, even global labor market, completely setting the stage for international solidarity. Finally, Section 5, the Neo-Leninist Science Party, which is a completely different kind of communism.
And this brings us to the ultimate concrete solution. It is absolutely crucial to understand how vehemently this vision separates itself from what most of us picture when we hear the word communism. This text champions a completely different communism. It aggressively contrasts its idealized, dynamic science party against Stalinism. The Bolshevik model is celebrated as one of absolute dedication, free conscious choice, and scientific strategy. Conversely, it outright rejects Stalinism, condemning it as a tragic parody built on blind faith, constraint, and gray bureaucracy. This is a call for a highly structured analytical machine that is completely opposed to bureaucratic tyranny.
They draw a massive, unmistakable line in the sand regarding what their neo-Leninism actually looks like, demanding a party model which, by continual training of its militants, is the complete negation of that dependence on blind faith, on constraint, on administration and gray bureaucracy that characterize that tragic parody, Stalinism. So, to actually build this true revolutionary vanguard today, they rely on Lenin's strict three-step formula for party discipline. First, absolute dedication to the cause. Second, the capacity to deeply blend and organize with the working masses. And third, having the correct scientific strategy and tactics. The idea is that without all three of these pillars, any attempt at revolution is just going to pop like a soap bubble. And this isn't just left as abstract theory. They set a highly ambitious, concrete timeline, establishing their ultimate task: to work so that within one generation, the Leninist Party will be rooted in one of the warring continental powers. They are actively strategizing to establish this heavily disciplined neo-Leninist science party directly inside the European metropolitans before the next global conflict even erupts. Ultimately, this worldview leaves us with a stark, genuinely urgent challenge. Arguing that today's society offers the youth only false ideologies and the total guarantee of future conflict, the author asks, today, our society can offer the young only illusions. How will we use the time that remains to us? It's a forceful, provocative question that perfectly encapsulates the uncompromising tone of this text. What do you think? It definitely leaves us with a lot to consider regarding the fragile balance of our current global order. Thanks for joining this explainer.